Welcome to Making Conversations, a podcast from makers Gemma Millen and Robin Galway.
Today we speak with master woodmaker David Cousley.
Hello and welcome to episode 8. Today we are speaking to master woodmaker David Cousley. Welcome to the podcast.
Hiya.
Hello.
How are you? Thanks for inviting me.
No problem at all. So could you tell us a wee bit about your childhood? Were you quite a creative child, or how did you get into this line of work?
How long do you have to get going? Yeah, I was creative as a child. I haven't really ever wanted to do anything but art, in school and growing up. I came from, my mother was an art teacher, so she taught in a primary school. Enthusiastic would be an understatement. There's photographs of me as a kid covered from head to toe in paint and clay and this sort of thing. So, and she was like that in school too. She allowed kids to express themselves. She wasn't afraid to get paint out and let the kids just go mad, So growing up, I wasn't a great student at other things, but I did enjoy art and craft. After school, I did okay in my A-levels, but I applied to get into the art college to do a foundation course, but I didn't get in there. But I got into the Rupert Stanley, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was round on the Ormeau embankment, and I did that for a year. So I don't know that they have foundation courses anymore, but they were a great introduction to art college. You did a wee bit of everything. You did a bit of printmaking, you did a bit of ceramics, you got life drawing and all those things that were, very novel when you come out of school. It's quite a while ago, I'm afraid. I can't remember what I was really enthusiastic. It was probably mostly painting and drawing, because that was the more normal subjects. But I do remember we did a bit of jewellery making. I remember making a little bracelet out of copper with little copper leaves soldered onto it. And I remember at the time thinking, this is interesting, but it never went any further than that. So then I went to art college. I got in the next year into the Ulster University and did fine art. You could either do painting or sculpture. I did painting, but I can't remember why exactly I was funneled down that road. I was probably told you're doing painting, and I was that young and green that I just said, okay. The one thing I do remember in first year was that we did a kind of the first, I don't know whether it was the first term or the second term, you could go and pick 4 different subjects that you could do a couple of weeks in each. I did ceramics and I did fashion. I made a dress in fashion, and in ceramics I made these lovely coiled pots that I still have a couple of them. They were kind of in the shape of figures, so they were quite sculptural. So I was kind of interested in everything. I did printmaking and I went back to painting after that, but I think that was probably again because I was so young. I just thought, actually I want to move. I just finished my fine art degree and I was a painter then. So that's my education. After that, we're talking a long time ago. After that I came out and I went to Spain for a year, and then I came back and I got a studio in Dublin and I worked there for a while and trying to be a painter. Well, I exhibited a bit and I was so young that I was more living life than actually focused on work, Yeah. So I met a girl in Dublin and she's now my wife, and we moved. She was from Monaghan, and we moved up to Monaghan, and that's where I've been ever since. So I painted up here for a while, but then I started to get interested in woodworking, and I suppose it was probably we didn't buy it, we rented an old tumble down farmhouse, and it needed windows and it needed furniture, and it had no kitchen in it, and I started sort of trying to make stuff. And it really, woodworking took off from there. I just absorbed in it and fascinated by learning how to make things. It sounds odd now, but I didn't really realize that people made furniture with hand tools and they cut wood. And I did know a bit, but I didn't realize how huge a subject it was. And I started reading about it and learning and practicing and buying old tools. And it's developed from there. I've been nearly 20 years at it now. So I've had detours along the way. I've discovered stonemasonry. Then I realized that you could carve stone and bought myself some stoneworking tools and started working at that. And in fact, I've spent quite a few years as a stonemason in the past, not for the last maybe 10 years. I still do a wee bit, but I've built a lot of dry stone walls and done a lot of stonework too. But the woodworking has always been there too. Early on, I mean, some of the things I used to make were, well, not very well made, cutting pieces of wood and not understanding how you could manage to. I measured that and I marked a line and I cut it the wrong way, or I cut it upside down, or I made things that were full of filler, and so there's a lot of learning over the years. But the work I do now has been, I kind of see as separate to some of the other work that I do. I mean, I've put roofs on churches, and I've done a lot of, I still do a bit of conservation work to make money, which is working with old windows and doors and on old buildings. And so I work with stone and timber and glass and all sorts of materials. And I suppose maybe that's a common theme with me, and a bit like I was talking about our college. I just am interested in making and working with my hands and materials. And I've sort of got a bit older now and realised that I can't actually do everything. But at one stage I nearly wanted to. It would drove my wife demented now. I'd be working at all sorts of things all the time.
Oh.
So yeah.
Do you feel like learning more organically rather than being sort of educated in wood has kind of changed how you approach your learning? Do you think that not being told the technical aspect has meant that you can get more organic and free forms?
I think maybe it's just the way I am, that I'm not I wouldn't consider myself a natural furniture maker, because it's quite a precision craft. It's all about lines and measurements. And I mean, certainly I can cut dovetails and I can make precise furniture, but I've forced and taught myself to do that over the years, and I've made a lot of mistakes up until this point. But I've seen woodworkers that have that innate ability to make beautiful, precise work very early on. It's taken me a long time to learn that. Teaching myself, I think that's probably, like I talked about my mother, she just had no fear of and no concern to get tore into things and try new things and let the kids try new things when she was teaching. Real joy there with colour and materials. And I think that's really probably one of my strengths, that I'm not scared to have a go. I probably would have learned a lot quicker if somebody had taught me woodworking, but yeah, that's just the way it happened.
As a material, wood absolutely terrifies me, not only just because there's so many different types of wood, but also when you are working with it, although it could be seen as that material has been processed, even after something's been made, it's still very much so alive. It can move, it can adjust with humidity. And is there a particular type of wood that you prefer to work with?
Well, I suppose more recently, I mean, years ago, I became interested in green woodworking, which is kind of, well, a lot of woodworking would have been that type of unseasoned work. Not all of it, but making chairs, carving bowls. So I made myself a pole lathe and learned to turn that way. So I work both ways. So I maybe prefer working green because it's more sculptural. You can cut a block of wood and carve into it. It's soft, it's easy to work, but it'll also, if you're not careful, it'll split, and kind of more experimental. You have to be more careful that way. There's more mistakes, but it's maybe more pleasurable for the type of work I'm doing at the minute. Seasoning wood, you have to work with it. I suppose, again, like all materials, it's experience. Like Iroko, it's an African wood is unpleasant to work with. The dust is unpleasant if it gets in your lungs. It creates big long splinters that'll stick in your hands, and it's hard on tools. Whereas something like ash or oak is a beautiful timber to work. It's experience, isn't it? It's learning which timber suits which job. And again, like I said earlier, the woodworking is a craft that there's quite a lot to it. I mean, it's a huge, wide, broad family of trades, nearly all involved in woodworking. Yeah, I'm still learning. I know a little, but I would in no way consider myself, I mean, you said at the start, master woodworker. I'm in no way that, but I'm down the line. Yeah. I'm further on than I was 10 years ago.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't give themselves the time to learn and make mistakes. And, especially we've been talking to a few other people who have said about the urgency to have that skill and have it now. But I think if you allow yourself the patience to learn, that's how, obviously you improve and get to the quality
Well,
and level that you've got.
I suppose so. Patience is not a virtue maybe you have when you're young so much. It's taken me years to realize that taking a bigger hammer than the one you're hammering with and trying to force something is not always the way to go. And you've got to sit back and think again, or make the joint better to make it fit rather than baiting it with a big hammer. But I've learned that by experience, that you'll ruin a day's work by 10 minutes of impatience. So I don't know whether it's patience. I mean, maybe that ties into what we were talking about earlier, that I've worked at this, but at other times, I mean, I've been away from it and I've done other things.
So I have absolutely no knowledge really of wood. I mean, I suppose the only experience that I would say that I could call from is that I remember watching Norm Abram on the new Yankee Workshop,
yeah,
those old television programs, or This Old House,
he was
and
good.
things.
Yeah.
He's amazing, absolutely
And
phenomenal. The work that he goes into in terms of looking at a piece of furniture, looking at something that is being made, and then taking that back and remaking it again. It's just, I loved watching that. I still have those programs on. I let my little boy watch them, and it's such a very pleasing process to watch and enjoy. And he's so informative; it's phenomenal. But like, I haven't picked up enough to know. But whenever you're talking about green wood and seasoned wood, could you maybe describe for someone like me who knows nothing what that means?
Well, wood that you would, and that ties into me living in rural Monaghan, where I have access now to, farms are cutting down trees, or trees get blown, and I have access to wood which has just been fallen, or I can cut timber myself. So it's, you say it's green, but it's still full of water. It's unseasoned. Wood that you'd buy to make fine furniture out of needs to be dried out before you can use it, or else it'll just shrink and crack and warp and twist. So you can buy seasoned timber that's been kiln dried in a timber importers, all sorts of timber. But a lot of it comes from all over the world. A lot of it's American, a lot of it comes from Africa. I like, where I can, to use timber that I know the provenance of and I know where it comes from. So the other way of working not to seasoning wood is to saw it and put little stickers between it and let it air dry. And then that's another way of using it, but that takes time. I mean, you're talking years rather than weeks. There are two ends of the woodworking spectrum. Traditionally, a lot of the folk crafts would have used green wood, cut hazel and willow, and I mean, you're getting into sort of towards basket making and coopering, and those sort of trades would have all used green timber and cut it young and seasoned it quickly and learned to use it and adjust to the way it moves. The green woodworking, I suppose, is something that it has interested me for a long time. And, I suppose chair making is a big passion. So I spent a good few years making, there's different names for them, stick chairs or chairs with green wood. Quite often I would have a woven seat, and it's a lovely way to work because you can take a log, you can split it into sections, you can put it on a lathe and turn legs, turn rungs. Now you have to season certain parts of it, but only for a day or two, and you can split out the back slats and you have a chair from a tree, and you can make one in a couple of days,
Yeah.
So it's a nice way to work. You have shaving horses and draw knives and things. Yeah.
And is it about the time aspect of why it is that you love making chairs so much that it's a very quick product to make?
Chairs, well, they're difficult to make. They're quite difficult to make a comfortable chair, and they're kind of a thing that everyone tries to test themselves against. Can I make a chair, and can I make a new? Nobody can make a new. There's not too many chairs that haven't been made already, but we all like to try. They're quite a sculptural thing, and they're elegant, they're useful, and difficult. So I suppose sometimes when making cupboards or wardrobes or sideboards and different things, a lot of timber, a lot of time involved, and it's not something you can maybe make on spec too much unless you have a client or a commission, So yeah, maybe all those things tie into it. I mean, you have to be practical sometimes. And wood's expensive. And I like making them. It's a challenge. So
In terms of your design aspect, do you think there's a similarity between the painting works you would have done in university and the sculptural, chairs and pieces that you make now? Do you think it's recognizable as, your style?
I think my style of painting was recognizable, but I don't think, I mean, I loved color. I was good with color. It came naturally to me. So I pushed that for a long time. And I don't know that, I mean, color and form, I mean, what else is there? But they're kind of separate, And funny for having such a love of color, it does come into my work sometimes, but I kind of see it as separate now. I started painting again, well, maybe 10 years ago. It was about 10 years ago, and tried it for a while, but I just couldn't sit still. I had to be up on my feet. I had to be working. So it's kind of, I've moved on from it. So I think everyone else, you could say, like stonework, conservation work. Even at one stage when I was young, I discovered that men in Italy worked at old Ferraris were made by hand, and men took sheets of steel and hammered them into these forms. And I went, oh my good grief, that's unbelievable. And I had to go at that for a while. So I think all those things are linked. I think it's just materials and your hands and form. But the painting, not sure. Good fun, but
there's a lovely aspect to some of the pieces that you make. Like you're currently working on a Noah's Ark, and you've got some beautiful dolls and cats that we've seen before. And I think that's a lovely crossover. That's not something that people tend to do, certainly that I've noticed, where you have crossed over almost your painting onto the wood. People who can be quite purist about wood.
I never thought about that aspect. Yeah, I suppose the colour and all comes into the ark. And I mean, there again, they come from, well, I've made little animals and figures and characters for years. Now I've refined them over the years, so my skills have got better, and I've given more consideration to quality and and design. But they're still on the same. I'm still on the same line. It's a progression from those early things. I mean, I made one time years ago, I sold it in spacecraft. I don't know who was crazy enough to buy it, but it was Jacques, the French builder, and he was a little figure with. He was about a foot tall, and he had a big nose and a moustache and a French jacket on it.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, and he was painted, and that's worked its way through. The Noah's Ark is I love folk craft. I love the fact that men cut and carve these animals with a knife, and I mean, all those animals that I'm making for the Noah's Ark, the only thing that I use is a carving knife. I mean, the Swedish have a lovely tradition of carved horses, and simple, direct. I mean, men and women have been carving for thousands of years with a knife, carving wood. So, in fact, I turned up somewhere, I think it was maybe on, I don't know, Instagram or something, they discovered a couple of little wild boars, and they were 3,000 years old, little carved animals, so.
There's such a whimsy to the pieces that you make, like those little pieces that have such a character to them as well. And would you say that it's the making process of you carving them that really attributes that into those pieces?
I think that aspect of my work is linked to years of, I mean, I've always drawn. I still draw and illustrate, and just, I mean, if you see my sketchbooks, they're full of little characters, and just, I think that humor comes from that. It's linked to, maybe whimsy is the right word. It's fun, not everyone has to be drop dead serious, And that work is somewhere I'm pushing. I always loved to, have 5 kids and spent years reading children's books and looking at stories, and I know what's funny for kids, and I think, that's my take on it anyway, and that's developed into the woodworking and the model making and the cats. And I mean, I have a dog lined up to go, I have a fox, and I just need time to develop them and start producing them,
Wow, brilliant. So, and didn't you make, I vaguely remember, was it, there was like little race rabbit or something that you made? And little carts and cars and things?
I had lots of little dogs, and I'd have them, and badgers and things, and they'd all be driving little race cars. But their ears would be flying out behind them and their tongue sticking out. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, I
yeah,
remember those. Definitely. No,
yeah,
they're
they
fantastic.
do. They're funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
They're
I, sup
wonderful.
I suppose with kids' toys, I mean, it scares the life out of me, the insurance aspect of it and making them safe enough, but
Absolutely. Yeah.
also making them cheap enough. I mean, even the little cars, there's a lot of work in them, like, I suppose that's an age-old dilemma with craft workers is how do you make stuff cheap enough that people will buy it. So especially things like that are everyday things, but people do, so it's great.
So you were talking about the process of sort of hand carving with knives. Is there any, I know you've done some beautiful turned candle holders, or I don't know if they are turned, sorry. I'm just assuming.
Yeah,
Is
they are,
there,
yeah.
what variation of processes do you do? Is it that you have a form in mind and you just choose whichever way is best to go about it, or do you have a preference, like a preferred way of
Um,
making?
well, nearly all my work and always has been I draw, so I would just draw and draw in sketchbooks till I find a form that I think has potential. Sometimes I'll wait and come back to it, a few days later or a week, or I'll keep drawing. And those candlesticks, they started off as more kind of almost flower forms and bulb forms, organic things, and they've developed into, through drawing and through just turning them into the ones I'm making at the minute, which some of them I think I'm pleased with. Yeah. So yeah, all my work is drawn first in a sketchbook, but then I have to actually make it or make a model. I mean, the candlesticks and those turned forms don't take that long to turn, so I can go straight at it and see. I mean, there's quite a lot of them just don't turn out for me, but other things like a chair, I would make a model first, or other, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the way I work. Drawing will take you so far, then you got to get at the bench and have a go.
So I wanted to ask about design influences that would inspire you to make, particularly with the furniture. Would you have a design influence?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm constantly looking at artwork and sculpture and craft work and just, yeah, so one design influence, no, but when I started woodworking, I loved shaker furniture. I don't know whether you're familiar with shaker work. Beautifully simple, with all the adornment taken off it and lovely craftsmanship. So that was an early one. Then I worked through, probably my favorite designer is Finn Jewell. He was a Danish architect and designer, famous for his chairs, which are just, yeah, they're still mind-blowing and beautiful. Those were early influences and big influences. The work I'm doing now is a definite development from when I was younger. I loved James Krenov. He was Russian Swedish woodworker who promoted handwork and craft work in the 70s when it wasn't cool, and he got a whole load of young furniture makers and woodworkers back into the craft. And early things that I made were like little copies of his work and little shaker work and a lot of stuff that was kind of copies of Hans Wagner and these Danish designers. So that was just me poking a bit the way you have kids in the classroom and you'll find they're all copying each other and they're all drawing similar things. And I've just worked and worked. And I mean, we were talking about the green chairs that I made earlier. They're not in any way original to me. They've been made for hundreds of years, but just slowly tried to develop my own style. And I think that's just maturity. I think you've got to work your way through until you find your own voice. Starting to do that now.
Yeah. Is it specifically use hand tools and handworking that you would prefer when making a piece?
Handworking is really, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with machines. I mean, with timber now, I mean, I can't say I don't use machines because I do. I mean, even my green woodworking, I have to use a chainsaw to cut it, Otherwise, you can't be silly about it. You can't go at things with, an axe and spend days. And I use machinery. I have a beautiful bandsaw that I bought years ago. It's a big 19th century bandsaw that I love. So it would cut out my rough work. but all my finishing and all my carving is done by hand. I have a bit of a tick about, you can get all sorts of grinder attachments to carve with and all sorts of new machinery, but I take a hammer and a gouge. Maybe it's some sort of puritanical. I have to create pain for myself, but I just think I'm more in tune. I think machines are great for taking the labor out of things, but unless you know how to do it by hand, you're losing.
Yeah, definitely. If you search anywhere online, whether it's Instagram or Facebook for woodworking, you can't go anywhere without kind of bumping into these like resin videos of people pouring resin into things, and that seems to be a massive trend, particularly in furniture making. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not very critical of what other people make. I think I wouldn't use resin. I don't, kind of goes against, it's not really my type of woodworking, but if people like that type of workshop, why not, and it's flashy, I suppose, but yeah, sure, go for it. I don't like being too judgmental, because we're all trying our best.
Absolutely. You were saying that you worked a bit with stone. I did a bit of stone carving whenever I was in Finland and thought it was a fascinating process. What kind of stone did you work with, and have you done any interdisciplinary where you would sort of put the wood and stone together, or do you keep them as sort of separate practices?
I often thought some of my carved work would translate into stone, but I think I've kind of learned at this stage that maybe I need to focus a bit more than maybe my focus was a bit broad before. So I've worked with a lot of limestone. I mean, I'm not an experienced stone carver, but I've worked with stone a lot. Yeah, I haven't really used it. I know it probably would translate some of my work into stone, but I've got to stick to one thing at this stage. I'm going to stick with the wood. But you never say never, I don't know down the line.
So you've shared on your Instagram, I think it was during the start of lockdown, about how you were developing this old barn into a bit of an extension of your workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's that going? And could you talk to us a little bit about your studio space and your workshop? What kind of equipment do you have in it? What's the setup like?
Yeah. Well, when we moved here when we built this house, and I threw up a tin shed to work in, thinking that this was temporary, and I did put a base down for a proper workshop when I had all sorts of ideas for stone faced, an old barn, and all sorts of things. But lo and behold, up until the lockdown, I was still working out of the same tin shed. So it's not ideal for a woodworker because in the winter it's freezing. I have a stove in the corner. In the summer it would bake you alive. So, but just at the start of the year, I got a call from a friend to say that someone he knew was pulling down an old hay barn, and did I want it? It was going to be buried in the field, and I said surely. So I went and stripped it down and took it home, and during the lockdown I got a chance to extend the workshop. So I now have the full footprint of what I'd originally planned, only actually the new bit is fantastic. I love it to bits. Now it's given me twice the space.
Brilliant.
But the height is beautiful. It's got a lovely feel to it. Now it still hasn't got glass in the windows. I'm still so at night I'm throwing up plywood and putting a bar across it, and I've started to insulate it and shelve it out. So yeah, like all things, it's a work in progress. Kitting out wise, I do have machinery, but I really am not I have a lovely bandsaw. I have an old photograph of the bandsaw from an arts and the same bandsaw as mine from an arts and crafts workshop somewhere in the Cotswolds, and the workmen are all wearing white aprons and straw boaters, and there's my bandsaw, the same model in the corner, driven off a big leather belt. So I love that it's a monster. I have a lovely table saw, and I don't use a pole lathe anymore. I bought an old Myford lathe, which is 1950s. I love vintage machinery, so it's not a big lathe, but it does what I want to do. I have a wee planer and a thicknesser, and recently there I bought a new pillar drill, which is a nice old Startrite one, again from the 50s. I have my hand tools in a a big tool cupboard beside my bench, which is kind of a Franken bench. It was an old school bench that I've, over the years, I put drawers in and resurfaced and put an extra tail vise on. So I love it. I bought it from my dad, and he put it in his, he was a car man, but it was too big for his garage, and he gave it back to me, and I love it even more because of that. Because it's kind of he's dead 10 years, so it's kind of a double whammy, you know. It's a great bench. It's got character, and it's got sentiment there too. So that's kind of me.
Absolutely.
Big drafty workshop, you know, plenty of room around me outside, and
Yeah. Well, that sounds wonderful, and especially coming from such a creative family as well. I mean, your mother being an art teacher, but your dad also working on cars as well. That's working with your hands. Was that something that growing up, you exposed to that then through him?
he had old cars. He always loved old cars. So I suppose I kind of I try and feed that into some design influence that, you know, I mean, some cars are beautifully designed, you know. I love the form of them. And yeah, I suppose I got that from him working on old cars. And I think when I was growing up, what I did was take old bikes to bits and then not be able to put them back together and drive them insane. But in later, when I grew up, then yeah, it was a shared passion between the two of us. We worked at old cars. I still love old cars, but yeah, so that was a connection there. And working with your hands again, he taught me that. He knocked down walls and built extensions on our house at home when I was young. So.
And so you said that you built your house.
Well, we bought an old farmhouse when we started to get too many kids for the wee house we were renting, and we moved here, and we decided we'd build a monster extension on it. But it was a good idea at the time, but I decided that I'll build the blocks, and I'll make the windows, and I'll roof it, and I'll slab it and floor it and make the doors. And so we lived in a caravan for a couple of years out front, and it didn't take a couple of years now. It took 7 or 8 years to do, and I think it's finished. My wife thinks it's, you know, only a quarter finished, that sort of way. So yeah, so I don't know, I wouldn't do it now, but I did it then. I was young and enthusiastic, and yeah, I learned a lot.
And how did you find the balance of being a creative and being a dad and having kids in that environment? Are they very helpful, or do they sort of they don't like chipping in?
Well, I said I wasn't going to talk about them on this because they're too embarrassed, but growing up, yeah, I was working from home. I was here a lot, so that was great. Being a creative is not a steady income. It's being self-employed. You've got work, then you haven't. You know, sometimes you have too much work, then the next thing you're wondering where next month's money's coming from. So yeah, it's not easy that way. My kids I have my eldest son, he's a filmmaker. My daughter, she's just finished architecture. The next wee one's still at school. She wants to go to Denmark to do product design. My other son, he's going to do model making in Dunleary. So, and the wee fella, he's still killing orcs out the back with a wooden sword. So, so yeah,
You must be so proud. Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah,
such a creative bunch. It's amazing.
Well, the lockdown hasn't been simple now, but yeah, it's good having them all home. Yeah, they're creative. Yeah.
How have you found, lockdown? I know a lot of different people have maybe lost projects that they were doing and sources of income and things like that. And if nothing else, things have definitely changed. Have you felt much of an effect as a result of COVID?
Well, I've said income, yeah, difficult having everyone at home, and just it was quite an anxious time at the start for everyone. Being locked at home in the workshop, not so difficult. Built a new workshop, fantastic. So it's had its upsides and downsides, but yeah, I've made use of it, and I can't say I've got as much work done and new work done as I'd like to have, but yeah, we're working our way through it. I mean, it's it's difficult, but it's strange. I think for a while there we thought that we were never going to work again, but it seems to be people are adjusting to the new normal, aren't they? Yeah,
that's it. Absolutely. So we know that you've worked previously with Monaghan Textiles on some of your chairs, or maybe it was a chair that you worked with.
Yeah, well, I didn't work with them as such as. I love their material, and I've used it on good few chairs now. Yeah, I haven't made any of those chairs in a while, but yeah, I mean, their material is beautiful. So
Absolutely stunning, yeah.
yeah, I kind of felt guilty about kind of boosting my work with their work, but
Oh gosh, no way. No, that's totally not what's happening. No, that's a beautiful collaboration between,
Absolutely.
increase with function and everything as well. But what I wanted to know, if there is a dream collaboration for you in terms of another maker or another discipline. Is that something you've ever thought about?
um, well, I don't know about collaboration. I'm not sure. I mean, I'd certainly be open to it. Another maker. There's so many makers that I love their work. I'm not. Yeah, I mean, it'd be great. Any sort of respect or collaboration with your peers is great. Isn't it? I
Definitely,
mean,
yeah.
I don't know about that, but yeah, I'd certainly be open to it.
Would you have a dream commission piece? Maybe something that you wish somebody had asked you or would ask you to make?
Well, I have two or three things in my sketchbooks that I just would maybe take. I mean, I'm working on a piece at the minute. I was lucky enough to get a big sequoia, big bit red, yeah, a giant redwood that
Wow.
it had been grown in Rossmore Park and cut down in the 80s, and it's been lying in a yard ever since. And I got 40 feet of it, so I'm making a kind of a desk out of it, and it's all hand carved. So I've sort of taken half the tree and hand carved it, but it's kind of dementing me at this stage. It's taken so long, because I go back at it and then I go, I'm not starting anything else to get this finished, and then I can't get it finished. And so I have two or three things like that in my sketchbook. I would need to have somebody to commission them or something similar that I could take the time and get tore into them. So yeah, but involving maybe bigger, more experimental sculptural type forms, So yeah.
Mm. And is that the sequoia redwood? Are those
Yeah.
enormous trees you see pictures of from America?
Yeah, like in California. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the type of
One of
trees you
those.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And I only got the bottom 40 feet of it, but that's maybe only a third of it. It used
Amazing.
to bring them back in Victorian times and grow them as specimens in big country estates and houses and things. Yeah. So so no, it's a strange timber. It's actually a softwood, so it's quite light and hard to carve. But
Right.
when you cut it open, it's vibrant pink. It goes darker with age,
Wow.
but it's pure pink. Love it. Yeah.
Amazing.
Is there much waste in working with wood? Like, obviously you have a solid piece of wood, can you, with sort of offcuts and things, do they become badgers and bits and pieces, or
Well, very definitely with that sort of work that there's very little that couldn't be used. I suppose some of the carved pieces where you're hollowing out a block, there would be a bit of waste, but most of that wood will probably end up as firewood if you didn't rescue it. So, so much timber is just sawn up and burnt. So it's not really a waste. I suppose hollowing out a big block of sequoia could be considered wasteful, but I'm giving it another life. So,
do you work within your community quite a bit? Like you were saying that somebody had phoned you up to say, oh, do you want this old barn or this piece of wood? Like, are you quite well known within your community?
Yeah, maybe not so much for my artwork, which wouldn't have as big a use, but I mean, I'm well known for woodworking. Yeah, I've taken out worked on a lot of churches. I mean, every church in the country has rotten windows and floors that are sagging. And in fact, yeah, I mean, I fixed a staircase in a church on last week on Friday. So yeah, so I have built up, kind of a base that way. But well known for I think maybe more well known for being a bit odd, and there's that boy, you know what he'd be at next sort of thing, rather than in a good way. But yeah, I certainly have people that will keep me bits of timber or give me the heads up for things. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite type of wood that you like to work in? Like, what is your ultimate, dream material?
I don't know that I have a favorite wood. Some of them are easy to work with. It depends what you're working at. I used to love black walnut, but it's like buying gold now. It's that expensive. It's also not native. So you're buying wood that's been, it's been grown in America and shipped over. I love a nice bit of beech or ash is a beautiful timber. Oak, not much oak in there is oak in the country, but you don't come across it that often. Yeah, so I'm not what would you say? I'm not a wood snob, you know. I like wood. I like the discipline of it. I like working with it. I love it when it's finished, the polish it takes, and it's warm. Yeah. So, if you had like a favorite film, you were asking me that earlier. I don't know whether I could give you a favorite film or a favorite wood.
And what about then, instead of maybe picking a favorite wood, is there a specific finish that you prefer on your work?
That's something I've learned in the early days. Finishing is a whole skill in itself that I was, tortured with not finding the right finish, or if you leave wood natural, it gets dirty. If you wax, it's a beautiful thing to use, but fingerprints and all, and water will stain it and make it, your fingerprints will rub off and leave it dirty. So a lot of my sculptural forms that I'm making now, I'm actually using black ink, and I find that it's just Indian ink, which is soot basically. I can paint it on and polish it through finer and finer grits of paper and put on successive layers, and it gives me I like it at the minute anyway. I mean, for that type of work, I love it. Black, it's rich black color. I mean, you can use iron filings in vinegar, and that will stain. So I think I'm going to do that with this bit of sequoia, and it gives it a lovely black ebonized finish too. Been using black a lot recently, but yeah, black cats, and it's waterproof. So yeah.
Fantastic. Is that what you would use on your, is it beetle boxes?
Yeah, well, yeah, they're all black ink. I don't know whether that's what I should be using, but I like the finish. I love the polish I get. So that's what I'm using at the minute, yeah.
Do you get that polish from going down, the grades and making it a finer finish on top, or is that something that you find the black ink kind of adds to, it adds this sort of lustrous quality?
Well, it does, but most finishes will actually only show up your poor finishing rather than hide it. You can't really hide a lack of preparation with timber. So a couple of coats of black ink will show up terribly, a couple of scratches in the surface, so it's really just a kind of a polish in the ink rather than sand on the surface, which has to be done beforehand. But yeah, I go right down to maybe 1200 grit paper, to get that nice polish. But I mean, I'll probably go off that and start finishing them in some other way, next week. I have loads of different beetle boxes in my sketchbooks that just have to get that, different
they
shapes.
look gorgeous.
And when you say beetle box, is that like an official term, or is that just something that you have called them?
No, I just thought they looked like little black, the little shiny black beetles that all the women start screaming when they crawl across the floor and when you're watching TV.
They are beautiful though. I do love them. They're gorgeous. But I did wonder because I know there's like dovetail joints and, all these different types of butt joints and certain terms for wood that I didn't know if, a beetle box was an official, like a thing. But no, I love that you've just made that up.
No, only with me. Yeah, only with me.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And so who would be your typical client? I'm ashamed to say I've only had a few pieces made of furniture once we moved into our house, and our go-to is Ikea, as I'm sure is quite the same with people. But how do you sort of feel about mass-produced furniture industries such as Ikea and things like that?
Well, IKEA is great we have a house full of IKEA ourselves. It's the way it has to be, and it's the way it's been for a long time. Not everyone can afford handmade furniture. I mean, I recently made an outdoor bench for an old couple that wanted somewhere to sit outside. I think maybe they were thinking about social distancing and sitting outside with people that called and things, and they could buy a teak bench in B&Q for €200 or €240, but I couldn't buy the material for that, so I think as long as it's reasonably well designed. I mean, IKEA furniture is not going to last forever. It's got a lifespan like everything nowadays, but it has a place. I initially thought that maybe I could turn myself into a mass producer, make furniture and chairs and tables, but that way I have to scale up and maybe employ people and invest in machinery and a bigger workshop, and my work's not going that way. It's actually going maybe the opposite way. more towards art pieces.
I was also wondering, would you consider yourself to make product, or are they kind of more one-off pieces? Is it because obviously it's not something
like
that is easy to mass make?
the wee cats, and I made a set of wee dolls called Kay before that. Well, I made a couple of runs of them. They're made to be produced in a series, but not mass produced, but maybe produced in, I make them in tens, because 20 legs and 20 arms or 40 leg joints and this sort of thing. That's a way that I can scale up but not go completely out of control, because everything, I don't have a copy laser and it's all turned by hand. So, but on a bigger scale than that, no, I can't see that happening. But yeah, so those are made to be mass produced. My other furniture, maybe not, Well, if you're making a set of chairs, you have to make 6 all the same. But
what is your favorite piece or item that you've ever made?
I don't know. With your work, and you probably know it with your own work, you look back at some things and you go, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? And that's not the stuff that doesn't end up in the bin, but things that stand up are things that you can go back to after a few years and think, I'm talking to you now on a chair, and it's one of my older chairs, but it's comfortable. It's as refined as I was able to make this style of chair. There's no mistakes on it. It looks nice as far as it goes, and it's just a nice, honest, well-made thing. And yeah, so
beautiful. Is your house filled with original pieces?
No, well, yeah, pieces that nobody wants, but I have some stuff in it, all right, but not as much as you'd think. But yeah, it doesn't need to be. It's nicer if other people have your work, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's why you're working.
Is there any advice you wish you'd known or that you could give to other people starting out in woodwork or painting?
Be excited, be interested, be open to everything that's around you. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I used to beat myself up terribly for having no focus, for jumping from one thing to another, one discipline to another. And now I see it as a progression. It's all made me who I am now. So yeah, try it. Sure, what's the worst that can happen?
Fantastic. Please don't anybody injure yourselves. Has there been anything that has gone horribly wrong, or like one of the mistakes that you've really learned from, whether that's in selling or in making or in any form of creative practice? Quality
is important, isn't it? Early on, I made things that would come back to me, and I made a set of chairs once. Now I'm talking, it could be 18 years ago, and I upholstered them myself, but the upholstery came loose and came back, and people are buying an idea of handmade, and the quality needs to be there. Yeah, I think. So yeah, disasters selling to people. I've had a few, not anything terrible where I got sued or anything, but I've had lots of disasters in making, so much has not worked. But that's all part of it, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you were to encourage someone, or if someone really wanted to begin to invest in handmade furniture, handmade woodwork, what piece, or is there a specific piece that you would suggest that people would invest in first? Or, maybe if they were looking to support someone like yourself, is there a particular piece that you think that's a really great starting point in terms of
like one of my wee cats would be great.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it nice to have a range of products from like the little beetle boxes and things that aren't in my own work anyway, that aren't particularly dear, right up through. So I don't know who told me that, or maybe it's just different people have said that, if people like your work, but they can't afford a table and 6 dining chairs, they can buy something small. Yeah, so, and we've done that ourselves with people's work that we've liked. We're never maybe going to be able to afford to commission them to make something, but we pick little things up that are, we love. Yeah. Where
could someone go? Do you think that maybe wouldn't be a university level, but you could go and kind of enter into learning woodcraft? Because it's something that I personally would love to know a little bit more about, but I know I don't have the patience or access to the tools to kind of do it to a good degree.
To learn it there are lots of colleges where you can learn furniture making, but I'm sure they're expensive. I used to do classes. I taught classes in the Ulster Folk Museum, and then I taught for the Northeastern Health Board as well, classes in, well, it was green woodworking, but we had grass rakes and stools. So you had maybe 6 2-hour long classes, or well, the ones in the Folk Museum were a day class, and everyone learned how to maybe carve a bowl or make the stools were popular because who doesn't love a stool? They're fantastic for all sorts of things. But it gave people an introduction to woodworking. They learned how to use hand tools. They got a wee bit of a feel for timber. And some people didn't enjoy it. And some people were pure naturals. They just were like, oh my goodness, you've done this before? No. So something like that. And there are classes like that about, especially with green woodworking, that will give you an introduction to making things. So maybe that would be a start for people. Like a lot of people have a kind of a grow for working with their hands, for crafts. They've remembered people that belonged to them that made things, or, you know, a lot of people had a grandfather that was a woodworker, you know, that would be a good start.
Do you think there's much of a community of wood makers throughout Ireland? Like we would know, you know, maybe 3 or 4 wood people, but is there much connection between makers, or are you kind of, you know, working by yourself an awful lot?
Yeah, I've been I had a friend a couple of miles away who was a woodworker too, and we would interact a certain amount over the years. So it was certainly good to team up to, you know, access wood and take trees and things and share costs and travel and ideas, even bounce ideas off each other. But on a bigger scale than that, no. And it's something although I do love the country, I have a love-hate with living in an isolated rural part of the world. It's wonderful in a lot of ways, but you are isolated from other makers. And it's something I've felt because it's not just the making, it's the ideas, or it's even just talking to like-minded people is important, you know. So there are a community of woodworkers. I know a lot, but I suppose it's like everything, you have to make friends with people and you have to put the time into it.
And would it be quite competitive in terms of accessing materials? Would materials be quite scarce in terms of, you know, maybe accessing fallen trees from maybe like National Trust sites or so on? You know, is that something that happens frequently?
Well, maybe from those bigger sites, you would get the bigger sawmills would get the heads up on what trees have fallen. But no, there's no shortage of wood in the country, and the problem is getting to it before it's sawn up into firewood. You know, it's not particularly. Yeah. Most people just think of timber as firewood, but you know, when you're looking at it, you're going, there's 6 months materials in that tree, you know. So but there's no scarcity.
Would you ever consider growing your own trees and your own source of wood?
Well, yeah, but I'm going to be dead before they're big enough to cut down. So we have lots of trees around us, but yeah, I wasn't there. If I'd done it 20 years ago, yeah, there's lots of wood in the country, you know, and people are always quite happy to see it go to a good home, you know.
Would you say that you're quite an outdoor person? I would imagine that if I worked in a material such as wood, I couldn't go walking in a forest without thinking, oh, I'd quite like there to be a big storm for that tree, you know, or you know, something like that.
Or joking with people that, that tree could fall down, a nice tree on the property, but I grew up in Belfast. I was a city kid, so I've learned this over the years. So but you have to be on my feet outdoors now, working outside.
So you seem like someone that doesn't like to stand still very often, you know. You seem like you like to always constantly stay focused and inspired and creative. So what do you do to unwind?
Well, we went to I try not to unwind. I like to go into the workshop to unwind, much to my wife's annoyance, but we went to Connemara a couple of weeks ago, and we were able to with the lockdown, and I fought and resisted, and then I can't go, I've too much work on, and the stuff I've got in my head will disappear if I go, and I resisted it, and I went, and I just had the 3 or 4 of the most best days, you know. It was like a refresher. So that I made a mental note to myself to we have to do that more often, you know. Yeah, to unwind. Other than that, I mean, I do everything that we have. We have pizza oven at the back, so every Saturday evening we have pizzas, and one of my sons makes them now. I don't have to even make them anymore.
Brilliant.
So stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah, and is that a wood-fired pizza oven then? Or yeah. You're using all the wood coming from the workshop to fuel the pizza.
Any scraps are going into it, yeah.
Yeah.
It's getting a bit cold now, maybe, but yeah.
What pizzas are you making? Have you been to Italy? Are you a pizza connoisseur then? If you have a pizza oven?
Well, we like. Well, we're not connoisseurs, but we like a good pizza, but we're not snobby about it, like, you know. But we have been to Italy, and funny there, you get a good one and a bad one. It just depends, you know. But but it's a long time ago since we were in Italy. But yeah. We were there once, all right. Beautiful. Brilliant. And we've been making them for years, and the kids still love them every Saturday. You know, so
brilliant tradition then, that's it.
What's the last piece of locally made craft you would have purchased or swapped or acquired in some way?
This is a guilty one, but because I probably don't buy enough. But we have got a couple of things. When we were in Connemara, we bought a few things. Was it Joyce's craft shop down there that we bought a basket in and some little clay pieces. My daughter was 24. We bought her a gold ring for her birthday, and it was a lad that worked a couple of years below her. He's studying architecture, but he's a jeweler in his spare time, so it's just a little gold band with a square front on it. So that's the last thing we bought, and she loves it. So, and it's kind of that's what it's all about, isn't it? Getting something handmade for her, you know, it's special.
Absolutely. And how can people get in contact with you?
Well, an email, and I'm on Instagram. I suppose they can message me on that.
Brilliant.
Is that the best way? Or my phone number's on the website. Instagram is at Cousley D, Cousley D, and the website's davidcousleywoodworking.com. We've gone through so many names, it's ridiculous, but that's it at the minute, anyway. The only other thing I'm going to give a shout out to is we have a rescue dog called Rusty, and I do a comic strip about him. I've been doing it for a while, and he's on Instagram at Rusty Cousley, Rusty.
Oh, I'm going to have to look him up. That is brilliant.
It's called Gunshine. So it's only a bit of fun. But
is he a studio dog?
But well, he's the family dog, but we've had the cats involved too. So it's kind of grown up with Snoopy and Garfield and all those things. So it's just a bit of fun. But
yeah. No, I spoke about my studio dog. I have a Basset Hound, big long ears, and he's really super long, and he's so daft. He's ridiculous. But any piece of wood he can get his jaws around, he will. I hope that Rusty is a very good dog for you. How old is he? Where did you get him? What type of dog?
He's an English setter, and we got him as a rescue dog, but he'd been just dumped on a mountain, and we think maybe he was gun shy, which is when a hunting dog scared of, I don't know why, but that's what the comic strip's called. So at any loud noise, he'll be lying on his back playing dead. So he's but he's a great fella.
Yeah.
I'm on the Instagram now, and they are brilliant. And I love how the illustrations of your cats look so similar to your cat sculptures as well. They're fantastic.
We have that. That's Gigi, our cat. So
gorgeous. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for asking me. It's been a pleasure.
What a great episode. Thank you so much, David, for taking part. It was wonderful to speak with you. Thank you also to the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, who have kindly supported our second series thanks to their Artist Emergency Programme. Our next episode is coming up on Thursday, the 8th of October 2020.